My ex gave our savings to his mistress, and I won the lottery and didn't give him a dime. But that's getting ahead of myself, because 3 months ago I thought Marcus was the love of my life, and I was planning our future with money that was already gone. The bank statement felt like ice in my trembling fingers. Numbers that should have been familiar, comforting even, stared back at me like accusations. Our joint savings account, the one we'd been building for 5 years, the one meant for our wedding, our house, our future, showed a balance of $47.32. My chest constricted, each breath becoming a conscious effort as I scrolled through the transaction history on my phone. Withdrawal after withdrawal, all authorized by Marcus. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, smaller amounts scattered throughout the past 6 months like breadcrumbs leading to my destruction. The largest single withdrawal, $28,000, was dated just 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when Marcus had kissed me goodbye that Tuesday morning and told me he loved me more than anything in the world. The coffee shop around me faded into white noise as my vision tunneled. The cheerful chatter of morning customers became a distant hum. The hiss of the espresso machine transformed into static. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped my phone, and I pressed my palms flat against the small wooden table to steady myself. The surface felt real, solid, unlike everything else in my world that was suddenly dissolving. $63,000. Gone. My throat burned with the effort of not screaming. Not here, not in public, not where strangers could witness the complete demolition of my carefully constructed life. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to piece together the timeline that had been unfolding right under my nose while I remained blissfully, stupidly unaware. The late nights at the office that had become more frequent. His phone face down on every surface, password protected for the first time in our relationship. The way he'd started taking calls in the other room, his voice dropping to whispers that I'd assumed were work-related stress. The new cologne, the renewed interest in the gym, the subtle changes I'd attributed to a midlife crisis at 34, all the while he'd been systematically draining our future. My coffee had gone cold, but I wrapped my hands around the ceramic mug anyway, needing something to anchor me to the present moment. The morning sun streaming through the cafe windows felt mockingly cheerful, illuminating dust motes that danced carelessly through the air while my world crumbled in digital numbers on a small screen. I knew I should call him, confront him immediately, demand answers. But something deeper than rage was taking root in my chest, a cold, calculating awareness that knowledge was power, and right now I held information he didn't know I possessed. Instead of rushing into battle, I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal. The next 3 hours passed in a haze of financial detective work. I requested statements from our credit cards, analyzed spending patterns, traced payments to companies I didn't recognize. Each discovery was another small death, another piece of my trust cremated in the furnace of his deception. Victoria's Secret charges when he hadn't bought me lingerie in years. Restaurant receipts from places we'd never been together. Expensive places, the kind where you take someone you want to impress. Hotel reservations in nearby cities during weekends when he'd claimed to be visiting his sick mother. His mother, who I learned through a careful, seemingly casual phone call, hadn't been sick at all. But the smoking gun came in the form of a payment to Clearwater Property Management, a monthly recurring charge of $4,000 that had been running for 8 months. $32,000 total, paid for an apartment I'd never seen, in a complex I'd never heard of, for a woman whose name I discovered through a simple Google search of the property management company's tenant directory. Ashley Morrison, 26 years old. A dental hygienist who posted Instagram photos of designer handbags and vacation trips that should have been impossible on her salary. Photos of dinner dates at restaurants I now recognized from our credit card statements. Photos of jewelry that I'd seen charged to our account but never received. She was beautiful in the way that made my stomach turn. Young, blonde, with the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having been truly disappointed by life. Her smile was bright and genuine in every photo, the smile of someone who believed she deserved every good thing that came her way, even when those good things were stolen from someone else's future. But it was the photo posted 3 days ago that made my blood crystallize into something cold and permanent. Ashley, radiant in a white sundress, holding up her left hand to display a diamond ring that caught the sunlight like captured fire. The caption read, "He finally popped the question. Planning our dream wedding and can't wait to start our new life together." The ring was beautiful, elegant, expensive, exactly the style I'd admired when we'd gone window shopping 6 months ago, when Marcus had claimed we needed to save more before we could afford something that nice. Apparently, we'd saved enough for someone else's dreams. The numbness that had protected me through the morning of discoveries finally cracked, and rage poured through the fissure like molten metal. I sat in my car in the cafe parking lot, gripping the steering wheel while sobs tore through my chest. Not the pretty tears of movie heartbreak, but ugly, choking sounds that came from somewhere primal and wounded. 5 years? 5 years of building a life with someone who'd been methodically dismantling it behind my back. 5 years of trust, of shared dreams, of splitting every expense and combining every resource because we were a team, a partnership, two people working toward the same future. Except we weren't. I was working toward our future while he was funding his escape from it. The betrayal was comprehensive, artistic in its cruelty. Not just the money, though $63,000 represented years of my life, overtime shifts as a nurse, sacrificed vacations, choosing generic groceries over name brands, all so we could build something together. Not just the infidelity, though the thought of him touching her with the same hands that had held me made my skin crawl. It was the calculated nature of it all, the way he'd continued to kiss me goodnight while planning his exit strategy, the way he'd let me dream about our wedding while he shopped for rings for someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again tonight, don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of those 3 words, "love you," sent a fresh wave of nausea through my system. How long had he been signing his lies with declarations of love? How many times had he looked into my eyes and professed feelings that were already rotting from neglect and deception? I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Part of me wanted to unleash everything I'd discovered, to watch his comfortable lies collapse in real time. But something else was crystallizing in my mind, something cold and patient and infinitely more satisfying than immediate confrontation. Marcus thought he was smart. He thought he'd been careful, clever, that he could have his cake and eat it too, keep me as his safe, stable backup plan while he built a new life with his young, exciting mistress. He thought he could steal our future, and I'd never be the wiser until it was too late for me to do anything about it. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd underestimated me. Instead of texting back, I drove home, to the apartment we'd shared for 3 years, the apartment where I'd been living a lie without knowing it. Every familiar object felt contaminated now. The couch where we'd planned our future, the bed where he'd held me after stealing from me, the kitchen table where we'd celebrated my promotion just last month, the promotion that came with a significant raise, money that would never make it into our savings because there was no "our" anymore. The apartment was quiet, empty, waiting. I walked through it like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. How many times had Ashley been here? Had they laughed about me in my own living room? Had she admired the life he was planning to abandon? The life I'd helped build brick by brick? I sat on our bed, my bed, and let the full scope of my situation settle over me. The money was gone, probably unrecoverable. The relationship was over, had been over long before I'd realized it. In the morning, I'd need to start the process of untangling a life I'd thought was permanent. I'd need to find a new place to live, rebuild my savings from nothing, start over at 32 with less than I'd had at 25. The practical implications were staggering, but underneath the fear and anger, something else was taking root. Something patient and cold and absolutely certain. Marcus thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully executed his escape plan, traded up for a newer model while leaving me with the wreckage. He was probably with her right now, maybe telling her about the life they'd built together with the money he'd stolen from his crazy ex-girlfriend, who'd never been smart enough to notice what was happening right under her nose. But the game wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. I opened my laptop and began to plan. The first phase was information gathering. If Marcus could be patient and systematic in his betrayal, I could be patient and systematic in my response. I needed to know everything. How long the affair had been going on, what promises he'd made to Ashley, what version of our relationship he'd sold her to justify his theft. I created fake social media accounts, carefully constructed personas that could observe without being detected. I learned Ashley's routines, her favorite restaurants, her work schedule, her friend group. I studied their relationship through the digital breadcrumbs they left behind, piecing together a timeline that revealed the true scope of Marcus's deception. The affair had started over a year ago. A full year of calculated betrayal, of him coming home to me every night after spending his days planning our dissolution. The apartment he'd rented for her wasn't just a love nest, it was a trial run for their future life together. He'd been testing the waters, seeing if she was worth abandoning everything we'd built. Apparently she was, but knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed leverage, and more importantly, I needed a way to make the consequences of his choices feel as permanent and devastating as they'd felt to me that morning in the coffee shop. The inspiration came from an unexpected source, a conversation with my coworker Janet about her ex-husband's gambling addiction. She'd mentioned how she'd had to freeze all their joint accounts when she discovered he'd been stealing from their retirement fund, how protecting yourself financially was the first rule of survival when someone you trusted turned predator. But freezing accounts was defensive. I needed something more creative. I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. During the day, I went to work, smiled at patients, pretended nothing had changed. I let Marcus continue his charade, his late nights and whispered phone calls and increasingly transparent lies. I even played the part of the understanding girlfriend, telling him I missed him but supported his dedication to his career. All the while, I was conducting surveillance that would have impressed a private investigator. I learned that Ashley had expensive tastes and apparently no understanding of financial reality. Her social media was a constant stream of luxury purchases, designer shoes, high-end makeup, weekend trips to wine country. She posted about her amazing boyfriend, who treated her like a princess, who spared no expense in showing her how much she meant to him. My money. He was using my money to make her feel special. But the most valuable intelligence came from a conversation I overheard outside Ashley's workplace. I'd followed her one evening, not proud of it, but desperate times required desperate measures, and positioned myself in a coffee shop across from the dental office where she worked. She was talking to a coworker about wedding plans, about how Marcus had promised they'd have the most beautiful ceremony money could buy. That's when she mentioned the timeline. They were planning to get married in 6 months, just after Marcus finished settling some financial loose ends. With his ex. Settling financial loose ends. That's what I was to him. A loose end to be tied up and discarded. The cold rage that had been building in my chest for 2 weeks finally crystallized into something sharp and purposeful. Marcus thought he was playing chess while I played checkers, that he was several moves ahead in a game I didn't even know we were playing. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The lottery ticket was pure impulse, or maybe it was fate, I've never been sure which. I was standing in line at the grocery store, mind racing with plans and contingencies, when the elderly woman in front of me asked for 5 scratch-offs. Something about her hopeful smile, the way she clutched her tickets like they contained possibility itself, made me add a Mega Millions ticket to my transaction. $23.47, almost exactly what remained in our joint savings account after Marcus's systematic theft. I didn't think about the ticket again until 3 days later, when I was cleaning out my purse and found it crumpled between receipts. The drawing had happened the night before, and checking the numbers was just a way to kill time before I had to go home and pretend everything was normal for another evening. The first number matched, then the second. By the third, my hands were shaking. By the fifth, I was sitting on the floor of my break room at the hospital, staring at a piece of paper that had just changed everything. All 6 numbers. Perfect match. $47 million. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. I sat there for 20 minutes, just breathing, just processing the impossible reality that I was holding in my hands. $47 million? More money than Marcus could steal in 100 lifetimes. More money than Ashley could spend on designer handbags in 1,000 years. Most importantly, it was money that belonged entirely to me. I'd bought the ticket with my own cash after I'd discovered Marcus's betrayal, but before I'd confronted him about it. Legally, morally, practically, it was mine and mine alone. There would be no community property claims, no arguments about joint assets or shared investments. For the first time in 2 weeks, I smiled. Really, truly smiled. The claiming process took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of maintaining my double life, pretending to be heartbroken and confused while secretly consulting with lawyers and financial advisors. 3 weeks of watching Marcus continue his charade, his fake sympathy for my depression, even as he probably counted down the days until he could make his exit official. During those 3 weeks, I refined my plan. I could have simply disappeared. Claimed my winnings, moved across the country, started fresh with a fortune that would have made his theft seem like pocket change. But that felt too easy, too clean. Marcus and Ashley had stolen more than money from me. They'd stolen time, trust, the belief that the person who claimed to love me most in the world actually had my best interests at heart. They deserved to understand what that felt like. The first step was making sure Ashley knew exactly what kind of man she was marrying. I created a careful dossier, bank statements, transaction histories, timeline of the relationship overlap, evidence of the systematic theft. Nothing illegal, nothing obtained through hacking or breaking and entering. Just public records and information I had every right to access as the victim of financial fraud. I mailed it to her anonymously, along with a simple note. Ask Marcus about the $63,000 he stole from his last fiancée. Ask him if he told you he was still engaged when your relationship started. Ask him what other secrets he's keeping from you. Then I waited. The explosion was visible from space. Ashley's social media went dark for 2 days, then erupted in a series of posts about lying, cheating scumbags and getting out before it's too late. The engagement photos disappeared. The wedding planning posts vanished. In their place were motivational quotes about self-worth and starting over, interspersed with thinly veiled threats about men who thought they could manipulate women. Marcus's reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Panic, followed by damage control, followed by desperate attempts to salvage both relationships simultaneously. He called me 17 times the day Ashley confronted him, probably hoping to manage the narrative, to convince me that whatever I'd heard was a misunderstanding that could be resolved. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched from a distance as his carefully constructed house of cards collapsed in real time. Ashley, to her credit, was thorough in her revenge. She posted screenshots of their text conversations, including several where Marcus had described me as just a roommate at this point, and someone he was trying to let down easy. She shared photos of the receipts I'd discovered, highlighting the dates to show how he'd been taking her on vacations with money stolen from someone else. Within a week, Marcus's social media was flooded with comments from Ashley's friends calling him every name in the book. His co-workers were probably getting an earful about his character. His reputation was in tatters, his engagement was over, and his carefully planned escape route had become a very public faceplant. But I still wasn't finished. The second phase of my plan required perfect timing. I waited until Marcus was at his lowest point. Ashley had blocked him on everything. He'd apparently been staying in a hotel, and his attempts to reach me had grown increasingly desperate. That's when I finally agreed to meet him. I chose a public place, a restaurant where we'd had our first date. The irony felt appropriate. Marcus looked terrible. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same shirt I'd seen him in 3 days earlier through social media stalking. He was already seated when I arrived, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was keeping him anchored to reality. When he saw me, relief flooded his features. He probably thought this meeting meant forgiveness was possible, that he could somehow talk his way back into my good graces and salvage something from the wreckage of his schemes. He had no idea what was coming. Marcus started talking the moment I sat down, words tumbling out in a rush of excuses and justifications. He was sorry, so sorry. It had just happened. He'd never meant for it to go so far. He'd made a mistake, but we could work through it, couldn't we? People made mistakes. Relationships survived infidelity all the time, and what we had was too special to throw away over one lapse in judgment. One lapse in judgment. A year-long affair funded by $63,000 of stolen money was a lapse in judgment. I let him talk. Let him weave his narrative of temporary insanity and overwhelming regret. Let him paint himself as the victim of his own poor choices, someone who deserved sympathy rather than consequences. All the while, I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching him perform this desperate one-man show of manufactured remorse. When he finally ran out of words, when the silence stretched long enough to make him uncomfortable, I spoke. I told him I knew everything. Not just about Ashley, but about the timeline, the money, the apartment, the engagement ring purchased with funds stolen from our joint savings. I told him I knew about the wedding they'd been planning, about his promises to her, about the way he'd described me to his mistress as someone he was trying to let down easy. With each revelation, Marcus's face grew paler. By the time I finished recounting the full scope of his betrayal, he looked like he might be sick. Then I delivered the pièce de résistance. I told him about the lottery ticket, about the $47 million I'd won with money that was mine and mine alone, about the lawyers I'd consulted, the financial advisors I'd hired, the new life I was going to build without him. The look on his face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Marcus went through all 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds. Denial. There was no way I'd won the lottery. I was making it up to hurt him. Anger. If I had won, I owed him half. We'd been together for 5 years. It wasn't fair to cut him out. Bargaining. He could make things right. Pay back the money somehow. We could start over with this windfall. It could be a fresh beginning for both of us. Depression. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. The timing was too cruel to be real. And finally, acceptance. The dawning realization that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life just weeks before. It could have changed everything. But I wasn't finished. I explained to Marcus that I'd been giving his situation a lot of thought. How difficult it must be to start over at 34 with no savings, no relationship, and a reputation in ruins. How challenging it would be to rebuild from nothing when he'd grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, a lifestyle he'd funded through theft and deception. Then I offered him a choice. I could press charges, financial fraud, theft, conversion of joint assets. My lawyers had assured me there were several criminal charges that could stick, especially with the evidence I'd meticulously gathered. He'd probably serve time, definitely have a criminal record that would make finding decent employment nearly impossible. Or I could let it go, all of it. The theft, the betrayal, the year of lies. I could walk away clean and let him do the same. But there was one condition. He had to disappear from my life completely. No contact, no mutual friends, no showing up at places he knew I'd be. He had to move, not just to a different apartment, but to a different city entirely. He had to rebuild his life somewhere I'd never have to see his face or be reminded of the person I'd wasted 5 years loving. And most importantly, he could never, ever ask me for money. Not a loan, not an investment opportunity, not a desperate plea in 10 years when he'd hopefully gained enough perspective to realize what he'd lost. The $47 million was mine, earned through pure chance during the worst period of my life, and he would never see a penny of it. Marcus stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The magnitude of what he'd given up was finally sinking in. Not just the money, though $47 million was more than either of us had ever dreamed of having. But the life we could have built together, the security and freedom and possibilities that had literally been a lottery ticket away when he decided to bet everything on a 26-year-old dental hygienist. He tried to negotiate. Surely I could spare something, maybe just enough to help him get back on his feet. We'd been together for 5 years. Didn't that count for something? He'd made mistakes, yes, but people deserved second chances, didn't they? I listened to his pleas with the same patience I'd shown his excuses, then calmly explained that second chances were earned through truth and accountability, not demanded through emotional manipulation. He'd had countless opportunities to be honest with me over the past year, countless chances to end our relationship with dignity instead of draining our savings behind my back. He'd chosen deception every single time. Now I was choosing justice. Marcus left the restaurant looking like a man who'd just watched his entire future evaporate, which I suppose he had. I sat there for another hour, sipping my coffee and watching the world continue to turn outside the window, marveling at how different everything looked through the lens of financial freedom. $47 million. After taxes, I'd still have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. I could quit my job if I wanted to, though I loved being a nurse too much to stop helping people. I could travel anywhere, buy anything, live however I chose without ever worrying about money again. But the real prize wasn't the fortune itself. It was the look on Marcus's face when he realized what he'd lost, what he'd traded away for a year of excitement with someone who dumped him the moment things got complicated. The third phase of my plan was the most satisfying: living well. I took a leave of absence from work, claiming family issues, and spent 2 months getting my new life in order. I bought a house. Not a mansion, but a beautiful place with a garden and enough space for the life I wanted to build. I invested most of the money conservatively, setting myself up for a lifetime of financial security while still having enough liquid assets to be spontaneous when the mood struck. Most importantly, I allowed myself to heal. The betrayal had cut deeper than I'd initially realized. It wasn't just about the money or even the infidelity. It was about having my reality rewritten without my knowledge, about discovering that the person who claimed to love me most had actually seen me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. But with time and therapy and the profound peace that comes from justice served, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my ability to trust my own judgment. The lottery winnings were wonderful, but the real prize was discovering that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than I'd ever been tested to be. 6 months after our confrontation in the restaurant, I heard through mutual friends that Marcus had indeed left town. Apparently, he'd taken a job in another state, probably the only way he could escape the social fallout from his spectacular public flameout. Ashley, meanwhile, had bounced back with impressive speed. Her social media showed a new relationship, this time with someone her own age who apparently had his own money. I wished them both well, in the abstract way you might wish well to characters in a book you finished reading. Their choices had changed the trajectory of my life, but they were no longer part of it in any meaningful way. The final validation came almost a year later when I ran into Marcus's brother at a grocery store. We'd always gotten along well, and he approached me with obvious discomfort, probably unsure how I'd react to any connection to his family. But the conversation was illuminating. Marcus had indeed moved across the country, taking a job that paid significantly less than his previous position. He was apparently struggling financially, living in a small apartment and driving a car that barely ran. More importantly, he was struggling emotionally, full of regret, bitter about the way things had ended, constantly talking about the mistake that had cost him everything. His brother clearly felt sorry for him, but there was something else in his expression when he looked at me. A kind of admiration, maybe even awe. He knew about the lottery win. Apparently it had become family legend, and he seemed to understand the cosmic justice of the timing. Marcus had thrown away paradise just days before it arrived, and everyone who knew the story understood the magnitude of his loss. I thanked his brother for the update and meant it. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing that consequences have staying power, that choices made in selfishness and deception continue to shape a person's reality long after the initial moment of decision. But the encounter also reinforced something I'd been learning throughout my journey. Revenge, real revenge, isn't about causing pain. It's about ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences, that people who choose to harm others don't get to walk away unscathed. Marcus hadn't just stolen money from me, he'd stolen time, trust, and the belief that love meant putting someone else's well-being on equal footing with your own. The $47 million hadn't just given me financial freedom, it had given me the power to ensure that his choices mattered, that betrayal came with a price that felt proportional to the damage inflicted. He was living with the consequences of his decisions every day, in his reduced circumstances and damaged reputation, and the knowledge that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life for a relationship that couldn't survive the first real test. That wasn't cruelty, that was justice. And justice, I'd learned, was far more satisfying than revenge could ever be. As I write this story, it's been 18 months since I discovered Marcus's betrayal, and 15 months since I won the lottery. I'm sitting in my garden, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, reflecting on how dramatically my life has changed, and how grateful I am for every twist of fate that brought me here. The money is wonderful. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Financial security is a kind of freedom most people never experience, and I don't take it for granted for a moment. But the real gift wasn't the lottery winnings themselves. It was the timing, the way the universe seemed to conspire to teach Marcus the most expensive lesson in consequences ever administered. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd won the lottery a year earlier, before discovering his betrayal. Would I have shared the winnings with him, funding an even more elaborate deception? Would he have eventually left anyway, taking half of an even larger fortune with him? Or would the financial pressure release have somehow saved our relationship, removing whatever stress he'd used to justify his infidelity? But those questions feel academic now. The lottery ticket I bought with pocket change while processing the worst betrayal of my life turned out to be the key to the most perfect justice I could have imagined. Marcus lost everything trying to gain something that was never going to last, and I gained everything I needed to build a life infinitely better than the one he'd destroyed. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But sometimes the best revenge is living well with $47 million, while the person who betrayed you struggles to make rent in another state. I've started dating again, carefully but optimistically. I've learned to trust my instincts while also protecting my heart and my assets. I've discovered that having financial independence makes it much easier to spot people who are interested in me versus people who are interested in what I can provide them. I volunteer now at a legal aid clinic, helping other people navigate financial abuse and betrayal. There's something deeply satisfying about using my experience and occasionally my resources to help people who are facing the same kind of systematic deception I survived. Knowledge shared is power multiplied, and every person I help protect their assets from a predatory partner is a small victory against the Marcuses of the world. But perhaps the most important thing I've learned is that healing doesn't require forgiveness. I don't forgive Marcus for what he did to me, and I don't feel obligated to try. Forgiveness is supposed to be a gift you give yourself, but sometimes the most healing thing you can do is simply accept that some people make choices that place them outside the circle of your concern. Marcus chose to steal from me, lie to me, and plan his exit from our relationship while continuing to accept my love and support. Those choices revealed something fundamental about his character that no amount of forgiveness could change. The kindest thing I could do for both of us was to accept that reality and build my life accordingly. He's living with the consequences of his choices. I'm living with the benefits of mine. My ex gave our savings to his mistress, and I won the lottery and didn't give him a dime. In the end, that's not just the story of cosmic justice served. It's the story of a woman who learned that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering who someone really is before it's too late to protect yourself. $47 million later, I can honestly say I've never been happier to be wrong about someone in my entire life.